Good morning. Throughout the summer, each sermon text has been taken from the epistles. And while today is no different in that regard, there are some differences worth noting, primarily a change in authorship. As we shift from Paul to James, you'll notice that not only the style of writing changes, but so does the content. With Paul, it is easy to get wrapped up and lost in grandiose theological concepts, ideas, as Paul tends to concern himself more with the big picture than the particular. That's not to say that he didn't have anything direct to say to specific groups of people, but that Paul chose to, from a bigger picture kind of level, address these issues. James, on the other hand, is often accused of the exact opposite and is treated accordingly. Where Paul's letters are scrutinized to find an occasion and reason for writing, the letter of James is usually assumed not to have anything like a reason or a point of writing. We tend to treat the letter as if it's merely a collection of proverbs or quips, cherry-picked pieces of wisdom. It's good advice. Rather than thinking about it like one of Paul's letters, which is well-structured, big picture. And you can do that, and that's totally fine, but you will miss out if you don't zoom out just a little bit and look at James on a larger scale. Take today's reading, for example. Typically, we mine the book of James for the particular, which means we hear today's reading and each of you latched onto a particular phrase or a line that speaks to you in an easy and accessible and very applicatory manner. Perhaps you latched onto the line about taking care of orphans and widows as you think of the work that we are doing together to sponsor a family of refugees from Afghanistan. Or perhaps you were drawn to the bit about not being angry as you guiltily remember losing your patience this last week. Or still yet, maybe James's words on being doers and not merely hearers of the word inspired another guilt-ridden part of your conscience. Regardless, though, of which verse you were drawn to, the point remains the same. We read James line by line like scripture fortune cookies. And though we find wisdom and truth in God in these verses that way, we miss the big picture by not asking the question, how does all of this fit together? What do all of these fragmented pieces of wisdom mean if we assume that they go together rather than separating them out into cliches, phrases, and one-liners? And most importantly, what is God doing in this text? Clear that we have options of how to apply these words and make this about us, but what is God up to? So if you'll allow me, let's restart with a different set of assumptions and see where that takes us. First, the letter has an overarching point that unifies the whole thing. Let's assume a unity of the book of James on a conceptual level. And second, let's assume that all of the quips and fragmented pieces of practical wisdom are not fragmented at all, but they are working together to serve the greater purpose of the letter. And third, let's assume that God is still the main focus here, even though the letter of James is thoroughly peppered with timeless, applicable directions for Christian behavior. Now, with those assumptions, let us reread the text. Every good gift and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. Of God's own will, God brought us forth by the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. Know this, my beloved brothers and sisters, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. The anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Therefore, put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. But be doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, they are like a person who looks intently at his natural face in a mirror. They look at themselves and go away and at once forget what they look like. For the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, they will be blessed in their doing. If anyone thinks they are religious and does not bridle their tongue but deceives their heart, this person's religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. With our new set of assumptions, this passage reads, I think, a little differently. From the outset, James makes it clear that God, who is ever constant and unwavering, has generously gifted us that we might be first fruits. And if, like me, you're wondering what kind of fruit this garden is producing, then you'll be glad to know that the verses that follow are a tour of the garden. The previously unconnected pieces of disjointed wisdom are actually all together the fruit of God's generosity in our lives. The fruits of patience, of a lived, done spirituality, of self-control and compassion for the marginalized. These are the generous, good seeds that God has gifted us with, so that through our actions and care for one another, the goodness that God generously gave to us can be shared with the rest of the world. And reading James this way is the difference between, I think, and eating the fruits and veggies in your garden individually versus putting them all together to make a salad that you can share with your neighbors, so that the generosity of God can be multiplied in how we live, how we act, how we treat one another. In this way, we become vessels for God's generous giving of goodness to the world. So today, rather than picking out one-liners and fortune cookie slogans out of James, join me in asking what the garden needs. Is there a particular section that needs spiritual attention? Do we need to water our patience or feed our self-control, or perhaps prune some weeds away from our compassion for others? But most importantly, join me in praying that God give us the eyes to see the world the way that God does, so that we can share the fruit of God's love with those around us. And if you'd like some help examining your life or your garden, or you would need some prayers from the elders, they'll be in the back during the next song as we stand and sing. And it's a good opportunity to think about the things that James has mentioned, and to think about the kinds of first fruit we were meant to be, the kind of fruit our life has produced. Let's stand and sing.